connected, and we access the internet over the wireless LAN. And then there is a emerging wireless multi-hop scenario where mobile nodes or static nodes communicate with each other over multiple wireless hops. So we are talking, so essentially the transport protocol does the operation of providing an end-to-end connection between remote host processes in wireless nodes. That's what we are considering. So the transport protocol space looks like this right now. So there is UDP on one end that does no flow control and no reliability, and there's TCP on the other end that provides 100% reliability. That is, it makes sure that every single packet is conveyed to the delivered in order to the receiver, and it adapts to congestion. So it holds back the rate at which it's sending packets. We are interested in this design space where in the wireless scenario there is also additionally MAC congestion because of interference, and there is also fluctuating SNR that causes a large loss rates in the links. And if we look at the literature, there are RTP plus techniques. RTP is it's called real-time protocol, which is actually tightly integrated with the application, and it uses UDP for as its transport. It provides in-between reliability, say to video or to voice applications. And our work will also cover those areas where it provides intermediate flow control and reliability. But in this work, we concentrate on 100% file transfer. The problem with TCP, for example, is that while it provides 100% reliability, the trade-off is delay. There is large delay incurred, which is not favorable for video applications, so they don't use TCP typically. Okay. So coming to transport over wireless networks, the TCP protocol is optimized mostly for wired links where they don't have the problem of interference, and the likelihood of a bit error is very low. Whereas when we come to wireless links, the error likelihood is much higher, and TCP has been seen to experience long delays in file transfer. Just to give you an example, in this is an orbit experiment result, where we show that this purple curve here is that of UDP. So this is a scenario where I introduced fluctuating errors. So whenever there was an error, the throughput in the channel went down to 0. Whenever there was no error, we saw that UDP had a reasonable good put. But what happened to TCP? After a few such errors, TCP shut down its operation. And even when it adapted, like in this scenario, it was much later, after 5 seconds. So this shows the scenario where TCP's flow control is not able to adapt to fluctuating SNR, while UDP shows that there is actually a reasonable good put, and that's what we want to use. So having done that introduction, these are the contributions in our work. We identified what are the core wireless problems that affect reliable transport. Then we identified, so there have been a lot of work that has tried to modify TCP. We showed some fundamental limitations in TCP that does not allow it to perform well over wireless networks. And our solution is we developed a novel transport protocol where with its features it's able to achieve significant gains in performance over that of TCP, and also it's able to utilize the good put that we see from the UDP curves. And in order to support CLAP, we used our approach is to use cross-layer information. That is, whatever the information is there in the lower link layers, we use that information. And to provide that, we implemented a cross-layer framework. There have been other such work, but there is not a systematic approach to extract the information. And we have our approach to validating all this is by using simulations and experimental methods, which is using orbit and doing real world experiments. Okay. coming to the problem. So the problem we address is that there are some core wireless characteristics that do not that make reliable transport difficult. So fluctuating SNR, when people are walking around in a room or there's opening and closing of doors, all these affect the bit SNR, that is the likelihood of an error. And this can be pretty high depending on the environment considered. And these translate to fading, shadowing, and there is also thermal noise in each receiver that causes problems for packets. Then there is interference in the shared medium. In the wired links, there used to be shared medium links were used in the wired scenarios too. But of late, things have switched. Things have moved mostly to switched scenarios where people do not typically share the same wireless medium, same wired medium. So the shared medium interference we see mostly is in the context of wireless links. And in the 802.11 links, which we very commonly use in the wireless LAN and then in the emerging scenarios, this problem seems to be a significant one. So here nodes use the CSMA-CA protocol, and this protocol was mostly designed assuming Poisson traffic arrival. We show in our work that for reliable transfer using TCP, for example, the MAC usually runs in saturation, and this increases the likelihood of losses. And so we cover these things, and these two form the primary core wireless characteristics that affect the performance. So these characteristics to the higher layers translate to this thing called self-interference, wherein packets of the same flow interfere with each other. And then it also results in time-varying bandwidth and error characteristics. This aspect has not been, is not typically addressed by transport layer protocols, because they are generally, they are traditionally designed assuming relatively slow varying links. There are also various lower layer adaptations, such as auto rate adaptation and MAC retries, that translate the fluctuating errors to fluctuating bandwidth. So let's come to self-interference. So what is self-interference in the wireless networks? So here I plot a chain scenario, a multi-hop wireless scenario, wherein a pair of nodes, there is communication between a pair of nodes, but that communication also affects other nodes. So there is the carrier sense range, wherein a remote node, for example, it can hear traffic from this node. It can hear a busy signal. So the CSMA-CA protocol of 802.11 does not permit it to transmit during that time. So this affects the channel time it has to send, and so it affects the bandwidth it has available. Then there is the thing of interference losses itself. So wherein packets collide and at a receiver, and it gets garbled. So when I did this is a simulation result. It shows how the UDP throughput reduces with increasing number of hops. And this is a TCP curve where with link layer enhancements, it pretty much follows the curve. In the one hop scenario, we see that for UDP achieves a 5 megabits per second good put. Actually, this is good put. Whereas TCP good put only goes up to 3 megabits per second. This is a simulation, and here it depends on the TCP version. The version I've used here is TCP Reno. The difference here is because of the bidirectional traffic in TCP that causes the data packets to have a much lower bandwidth. These are some of the issues of self-interference. Now coming to time-varying links, I simulated a multi-hop mesh network scenario. This is an emerging scenario, especially after the ratification of the 802.11s standard. Here we see that in this 4x4 grid, there are several nodes for a transmission in this primary flow. There are several neighboring nodes that are affected with changing bandwidth. So when I introduced a background flow and observed the bandwidth available in the primary flow, this is how the bandwidth fluctuated. So the bandwidth here is affected because the time available for transmission for any of these nodes is affected when there is a background flow, like these.
So which is the primary?
This one. 1 to 14.
1 to 14.
Background flow, this is one background flow that is introduced during this time, and then this is another background flow that is introduced later, so that so this background flow causes this fluctuation over here. The bandwidth suddenly drops. And then this is another background flow. So, and here this shows, in this I introduce noise in a very short interval, and this is the good put that is achieved because of that noise. So good put fluctuates because of, it's UDP, yes, that's UDP.
So if somehow TCP were comparable, you
I show that result later. I'm sorry? If TCP was comparable. Yes, I'm going to show you a TCP curve. Yes, it doesn't use, so this is the good put available in that path over time, and TCP doesn't make good use of it. So here I show how the bandwidth fluctuates because of lower layer adaptations. This is one result from Sachin and Zibin's paper, where they introduced time varying noise in the link, and they saw what is the effect of auto rate adaptation. Now this phenomenon, this auto rate adaptation scheme is introduced in most wireless cards by the wireless card manufacturers, because they want to try to make the link look as reliable as possible to higher layers. This, even in a one-hop scenario, it causes huge fluctuations in bandwidth. Like here we see that the bandwidth fluctuates between 6 megabits per second and 48 megabits per second. This happens because the changing physical channel rates being used. Then there is the effect of MAC retries. Now MAC retries in the one-hop scenario actually does fairly well for TCP. Any interference losses it overcomes. But when we introduce noise, I have introduced noise in this region, we see that the UDP good put fluctuates very rapidly. And in fact, when there is simultaneous background flows that cause bandwidth reduction, there are scenarios when UDP achieves zero throughput. So these are some of them. So what does fluctuating SNR do on TCP performance? We already covered this graph. So basically, while UDP good put is seen to fluctuate, TCP misses several of these good bandwidth opportunities. And the effect of, you'll come to it, that's the next slide. I didn't mean to spoil the So self-interference is this phenomenon where the ACK packets that are returning interfere with the data packets and cause not only bandwidth reduction, but they also cause losses. And because of various TCP enhancements that are there to improve performance in the wireless scenario, those same enhancements cause it to have zero bandwidth utilization. So while UDP achieves 5 megabits per second, TCP throughput drops to 1 megabit per second in this scenario. So so there was a problem. Now we'll try to.
So did I say this?
Yeah, you said it. You said it, and you walked into your office, and it actually inspired me at several stages. So we saw that there's a problem in wireless links, and so the opportunity we see is that, well, so the TCP protocol doesn't perform well, and we try to analyze why it doesn't perform well. And our hope is that, well, UDP is performing well in that it achieves a high good put. So even when there is a 20% packet loss rate, there is 3 Mbps good put available. So of course, just UDP is not enough, because a lot of applications need higher reliability. If I was using UDP to transfer a file over to see a Yahoo website, I would not have been able to see anything. So UDP is not good enough for that application. So we need an application, we need a protocol that will provide higher, that can provide high reliability despite all the wireless problems. And so we try to draw this. And then our hope is with cross-layer information. Cross-layer information has been used in different contexts in the past several years. It's been used between Phi and MAC, and then MAC and routing. There is less use in the transport layer, but and people who have used it have tried to provide link layer solutions for the transport problem. But what I'm trying to say is that there is lower layer information available, so let's use it. And the network today can support that because they do have, each node does have high processing power. And let's say in a 11 Mbps channel rate, if I use a small portion of it, let's say 1% of that available bandwidth to improve the overall performance, it's a good thing. So we'll see if we can do that.
So is this, you're talking about using 1% of bandwidth, is this supplemental network status information something that is actually transmitted in the network as opposed to something current displacement or something higher?
Yeah, so I do that for the one hop scenario. Radio card measures it, the link layer, I do it at the MAC. But in the multi-hop scenario, just that is not enough because the transport protocol is at the end. So I transmit that information with, I designed a protocol, a simple probe-based protocol to do it. And that's where I said if it consumes, if that information is sent at a low rate, a rate that is enough to capture the bandwidth changes, it's still good enough. So not only do we use, file transfer is typically measured by how much time did it take to transfer the file. And so you divide the file size with the time it takes to transfer it. In addition to that, because in wireless links you can have errors irrespective of bandwidth. Even if you have a 20% error rate, you have 3 Mbps good put with UDP. So we introduced, I mean we didn't introduce, this is a commonly used term, but commonly referred term in terms of when I know that when you're doing lower layer, when you try to measure how well a MAC protocol is performing, you always use good put as a measure. We used the same thing in the transport layer just to see bytes received and the time it takes to transmit it.
So the difference between throughput and good put will be, if duplicate packets are there, that will be counted in good put, but that will not be counted.
Correct. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So first we start off with what can we learn from TCP performance? What are the insights we can gain? So this is the scenario I'm using. A source is sending to a destination via an access point. So first of all, we observed that TCP, the data packets experience a lower bandwidth because of self-interference. So why? It's because we saw that when we measured the instantaneous good put of TCP, we saw that the peak TCP good put at any time was this number, 3.75 Mbps. When not this, around this number, even though the channel itself, we were using a channel rate of 11 megabits per second, a huge difference. So one reason is that there is a lot of MAC and Phi layer overheads, and so even when we see UDP good put, the good put is around 5 megabits per second. So what is the difference? The difference is because of the large number of acknowledgements. So TCP uses a cumulative acknowledgement scheme, but in default for every data packet that arrives at a receiver, an acknowledgement is sent. So when TCP is operating at its peak, that is it's sending the maximum number of data packets, there are also maximum number of ACK packets. So just simple back of the envelope calculation shows that I just counted the total number of packets, ACK packets in a, let's say in a 0.1 second interval. At some point, let's say it was like 40 packets in some interval. 40 packets constituted 1.47 megabits per second. So they were taking up the bandwidth which should have been used actually by the data packets. So what is the inference? Inference is that during TCP operation over 802.11 links, the feedback packets that is used for reliability reduce the bandwidth for legitimate data packets. So that is self-interference. it can have bigger data packets. So bigger data packets improve this, but still the self-interference problem won't go away. I mean, you will have bigger data packets. You could have reduced, you can increase this peak slightly more, but still there will be a difference at some point of time. We did a similar enhancement that I'll come to it. So not only do those data packets cause reduction in bandwidth, they also cause losses. So this is, we captured the trace of TCP dynamics, that is how while packets were being transferred. So in a certain stage when TCP was operating at its peak, there were 3 losses that happened. So first of all, you observe here that there are no 2 packets transmitting at the same time. Oh, I'm sorry. First of all, this this is the TCP sender over here, this curve, this line, and then this is the MAC sender in the wireless LAN case. This is the access point MAC, and this is the TCP receiver. So these numbers here are those of the acknowledgement numbers, and these numbers here are those of the data packets. So I show here which data packet is colliding with which ACK packet. The red curve is the data packet, and the black line is the ACK packet. So here there are 3 collisions that are happening. So what is the likelihood of a collision to happen? Well, 802.11 MAC was designed for post-on arrival of traffic. But when there is, when the MACs are operating in saturation, let's say there are n+1 nodes. I said +1 because of the access point. There are n+1 nodes, the likelihood of collision is given by this equation. And if there are just 2 nodes, in this case, like for a single TCP flow, the likelihood of loss is 3%. When there are 3 nodes, it's about 17%. 4 nodes, it's about 40%. So I'm doing a 2-node case because I have an access point and I have a wireless receiver. So the inference from this is at peak TCP operation, the 802.11 MAC is driven in saturation, and it increases the likelihood of losses. So we analyzed deeper. So if you remember from the previous chart, we had in the TCP good put graph, we had intervals of 0 throughput. We tried to see why that is happening. So the reason is that there is this very famous algorithm, fast recovery in TCP. It's used in almost all TCP enhancements, and everything that is all the enhancements for wireless, they all use it. So we saw that the problem was that it was actually aggravating the self-interference problem. So I'll just briefly go over it. I mean, we can talk offline if needed. So there are a few losses which I showed previously. When TCP notices that there is a loss, it enters into the congestion avoidance mode. It thinks that it's because of network congestion, and it goes into that mode. And at that stage, fast recovery sets in. For every incoming acknowledgement, it sends a new packet until that error is recovered. And it grows its window, the congestion window that it uses to maintain the number of packets sent. It grows it accordingly. But while it is growing it, it also it sustains that self-interference problem because there are more losses that occur. The retransmitted packet is lost right away. So what happens eventually is that the number of outstanding packets that TCP is maintaining is much more than the number of outstanding packets becomes much higher than the number of packets in the congestion window. So TCP cannot grow at all, and it undergoes a deadlock. So those deadlock situations end in a timeout, and those cause at 0 throughput intervals. So we try to reduce self-interference in TCP with a skip ACKs mechanism. What we did here is, because the ACKs are cumulative, we just try to send alternate ACKs or send fewer ACKs. But what this did was, as we increase the number of ACKs, TCP performance suffered, particularly if you see here in the where there is no link layer enhancement, where there are no MACs, TCP performance suffered because TCP depends on ACKs to come back to increase its sending rate. When there are fewer ACKs, the sending rate cannot increase, and so that suffers. So what is the inference from it? We see that because TCP's flow control depends on acknowledgements, that is the error control mechanism, we cannot reduce self-interference enough. So in the fluctuating SNR case, we showed this result earlier. We simulated a fluctuating SNR scenario in the NS simulator, and we saw that when there are rapid fluctuations, TCP simply shuts down because it undergoes exponential backoff and these mechanisms. And again, the reason for this is that TCP tries to adapt based on the pace of returning acknowledgements, and acknowledgements don't come soon enough, so it scales back its sending rate. Here, again, that's that self-interference problem. So again, the reason here is because combined error and flow control, when there are link losses and there are losses of ACKs there, it TCP scales back unnecessarily. So basically, there are many aspects of TCP that are mismatched to wireless characteristics. Wireless has self-interference, TCP has positive acknowledgements that interfere, that cause that increase the self-interference problem. Then wireless has bandwidth available even when there is channel loss. TCP has combined flow control and error control. So even when there is bandwidth available, it cannot adapt because it requires positive acknowledgements which may or may not come. Wireless has time varying links, time varying bandwidth, time varying SNR. But TCP does bandwidth estimation by the pace of returning acknowledgements. Acknowledgements have to come regularly. So these are the reasons that cause a wide gap in TCP and UDP performance. So going to related work. So this has been an active area of research in the past 15 years. So most available transport protocols are either most of them are TCP enhancements. Some of those are new protocols, but even those new protocols use combined flow control and error control. So they adapt. So we can, from this analysis, we see they will adapt poorly to time varying links, and they use positive acknowledgements. That is, acknowledgements come at the same rate, and they need those to increase the sending rate. So again, there will be self-interference. So their output can still be poor. So this is a table that gives from the wireless perspective, we see the protocols have been performed, suggested either in the context of cellular one-hop or the shared medium one-hop and multi-hop networks. Shared medium is what we use, the 802.11 links. We also categorize them based on low packet error rates, slow varying links, and rapidly varying links with high error rates. So as you see, each of the protocols address a certain symptom. The symptoms here is there is packet errors, and they try to get over that problem. The symptom here is that there is disconnections in the network. Disconnection happen when, let's say, you're a mobile phone, you're moving from one cell to another. So there can be a disconnection there. So how to handle that, how to do data transfer even during that situation. Then there is, in the 802.11 scenarios, most of the cases are considered are multi-hop wireless scenarios. So most of these address what happens when there are route failures due to node mobility. And all these are pretty much NS2 simulations. So there are so many regions that are not addressed, which represent emerging wireless scenarios. So there are some scenarios that are addressed mostly by lower layer solutions. So essentially, each addresses a symptom, and there is a lack of a general transport protocol. TCP became so popular because in those days it was able to integrate islands of heterogeneous networks. In the case of wireless, existing transport protocols do not satisfy that requirement. So these represent the emerging wireless scenarios that we consider in this thesis.
What do you think the definition is between slowly varying and rapidly varying?
Rapidly varying is what I showed in the mesh network scenario where the bandwidth suddenly drops to half the case. S- Time varying, yeah. I'm sorry? Yes. Disconnections need not happen very often. It can be like after say 5 minutes when I'm moving. As long as I'm within a cell, a disconnection wouldn't happen. Why I said that's slow. The why I said that is the approach they have used to overcome the problem is to just hold the TCP sending rate. TCP is made to freeze its state and resume after the disconnection, after a new connection has been established. If those situations happen too often, the TCP sender will keep holding back all the time. So the good put will go down rapidly, and then I wouldn't call that as we cannot call that as performing well. So what is our approach? So compared to TCP, to address self-interference, we use negative acknowledgements, and we optimize them so that self-interference is minimized and there are few duplicate packets. To address that there is bandwidth available irrespective of channel loss, we decouple flow control and error control. To address time varying links and high loss rates, instead of using its own acknowledgements to estimate the bandwidth, we use information that is already available in lower layers. So those are to maximize the good put. But what matters for reliable file transfer is throughput. That is, how much time did it take to transfer the file? We want to minimize the delay. So general transport objectives are, we want to maximize the bandwidth utilization while we minimize queue overflows. Why we minimize queue overflows is that, well, you want to share the network resource well with all the flows that are using it. And also, the more losses you have, the longer it will take for you to recover it. So you want to minimize that. TCP does that by using a joint flow control and error control. That is, whenever there are losses, it scales back the sending rate. It always assumes that the loss is due to router congestion. And so it scales back the sending rate to reduce this problem. What we do instead is try to match the link bandwidth, because in the scenarios we are considering, the problem is with fluctuating link bandwidth. When you are not matching closely to the link bandwidth, your queues will back up. Queues in the router could back up and it can overflow. So our approach is to use a rate-based flow control which can adapt quickly to changing bandwidth instead of a window-based algorithm like in TCP, and use cross-layer information to estimate that bandwidth. For error control, the objective is to provide 100% reliability while minimizing the duplicates. So let's say one transport protocol could be just to send that entire file again and again and again till it is received. But there the number of duplicates could be very large. So you don't want that scenario, because then the network resource is not used well. TCP does that by using positive acknowledgements and timed retransmissions. Well, if it does not get an acknowledgement on time, it retransmits the packet and it waits till it gets the next acknowledgement. That depends heavily on round trip time estimation. The problem with that is in time varying links, you cannot estimate the round trip time well enough. So instead we use negative acknowledgements that do not have overlapping feedback. So when the feedback is not overlapping, even when acts go more frequently, it's okay because you're not sending duplicates. Whatever acts you're getting, you'll just retransmit those packets. And by doing so, we minimize round trip time estimation, minimize the dependence on that. So the highlights of our protocol is it decouples flow control and error control to accommodate time varying links. The error control uses negative acknowledgements, and this is designed to reduce self-interference. To maximize the throughput, we reduce the dependence on round trip time estimation. The flow control uses cross-layer information, so to be able to estimate the bandwidth well. And we use a rate-based flow control algorithm so that we can adapt rapidly to adapt quickly to bandwidth changes. With a window-based approach, it's based on averages. And to provide cross-layer information, we developed a cross-layer framework. This is a software framework, and this provides the status information that CLAP needs to adapt the bandwidth. So the CLAP header is like this. So basically, it provides the basic transport functionality, which is multiplexing and demultiplexing. Has a source port and destination port. In addition, it has timestamp fields that can be used in effect to estimate the round trip time whenever required. It has the sequence number so that every packet can be identified uniquely, and the NAC number so that NAC number can be identified. Payload length. The payload itself, the data packet could have different sizes, and the NAC bitmap could also change. The bitmap is used to convey which packets are missing, and that can also have variable size. So this is how flow control happens in CLAP. So it uses cross-layer information in each observation interval, and it adapts the sending rate. So by adapting sending rate, I mean here that a certain number of packets are sent, and they are all sent at a constant rate within that is given by the cross-layer information. So that rate can change in every observation interval. And by using this method, when there is a rapid bandwidth change, like let's say the bandwidth suddenly doubles from 2 Mbps to 4 Mbps, if the cross-layer information gives that information correctly, the protocol can adapt quickly to it. Before that, CLAP also implements the fundamental things where it has to provide a virtual connection between the source and destination. And it does that with connection establishment and teardown procedure. So during establishment, it uses the SYN and SYNAC messages, which also tell the receiver how many packets it can expect in that file, and also the starting sequence number for the flow. The starting sequence number is not typically started at the same thing, because there can be a new flow that will also that can also start between the same two nodes, and you don't want a confusion. Okay, so this is for error control basically. Well, all packets will not be received correctly, and when there are losses, there are NACs sent. So there are two types of NACs that we have implemented. One is these pivot NACs, which carry non-overlapping information. The pivot NAC is sent when there are at least 8 packets after the first loss, such as this. Okay, the bitmap the bitmap in the packet in the NAC will report which of those are lost, starting with sequence number L1. A 0 in the bitmap indicates it is received correctly. A 1 indicates that it is lost. Like this indicates that L1, L1 plus 5 and L1 plus 7 are lost. The length of the bitmap is 8 here.
Is there a significance of number 8?
I just used it to minimize the length of the NAC packet. It could be much more. In fact, much more is probably better. But the problem is, if it is much more, then the NACs go back at much lower frequency. If it is very small, there can be too many NACs. So you want to reduce the number of NACs, but also send it frequent enough. So I just picked this number heuristically.
Why do you want to send the frequent enough?
Because what I want to do is, I want to avoid this scenario where all the losses are recovered in the end. If all the losses wait till the end to be recovered, then the sender will begin depending on the NACs to arrive back. So then there's the separation between flow control and error control is not there. Instead here, by sending the NACs frequently enough, I'm able to prioritize the retransmissions so that buffers can also be flushed. So if those losses are recovered, the sender can flush that buffer of all the old packets and so on. So when the NAC arrives at the sender, the retransmissions that are requested in that NAC, they are sent before the new packets. But they're all sent at the same rate that is available.
Requires selectivity from the receiver side. It's a different
That's right. Yes. So it needs to, yeah, yeah, right. So it would need to maintain a long buffer space, retransmission buffer. Yeah. So you want to flush it as fast as possible. That's not a problem I've considered here. I've considered that, well, let's assume that we have enough buffers. But if we have smaller buffers, we need to send the sweep NACs, which I'm going to cover next, for much smaller durations, regions of the file. So this is the next NAC, and so it goes on. But then there can be some NACs that are lost. The pivot NACs could be lost, and some retransmissions could also be lost. So we could come to the end of the file and still have lost packets. So what we did was, in addition to these pivot NACs, after the file has reached, towards the end of the file, we just picked, say, 90% in our implementation, we send something called sweep NACs. So sweep NACs cover all the missing packets from beginning to end. So we could have done this earlier. We could have done sweep NACs right from the beginning. But the problem with that is that would introduce dependence on round trip time, because we don't want too many sweep NACs to be sent, because if they are sent much faster, then you will have overlapping information of missing packets, and those same packets could be sent, duplicates could be sent, and we want to avoid that.
So are you implying that if you don't have any restriction on the buffer space, it's better off sending the sweep only at the end of the file?
Yes.
Is that what you're
Yes. Mostly because you want to avoid duplicates.
There's no loss to the receiver side packet on NAC.
I actually implemented a milestone NAC where after every 100, let's say the first 100 packets are received correctly, it'll send a milestone NAC that it is received. But it's not essential. Only if you want your buffers to be cleared up, which I think, yes, you would need that. Yeah, it could send a NAC. But the thing is, the sender will not wait for the NAC to continue sending the new data packets. That's the thing that I want to convey. So flow control is really independent of whether or not the packets in the file are received correctly. So sweep NACs are repeated periodically until all the packets are correctly received. So sweep NACs are periodic in the sense that after 90% of the file is received, there is a dependence on round trip time estimation. The way we did it here is that, well, as and when, if you remember, the packet header has a timestamp and a timestamp echo. So we use that to measure the round trip time for retransmissions here. So towards the end of the file, let's say the quality of the channel has not changed very drastically. Well, even if it has, it's fine. Whatever we need a estimate how often to send sweep NACs, and we use the round trip time estimated to decide the periodicity of sweep NACs. So what does all this gain? So we have done something new. This one shows a conceptual timing diagram of TCP. So TCP sends a data packet, gets back a NAC, and it increases its congestion window likewise. The congestion window decides how many packets it can send at a given time, or how many packets it can have unacknowledged at a given time. With the cross-layer information and with decoupling of flow control and error control, the transport layer actually simplifies quite significantly. We don't maintain any state machines on the sender side other than the buffer space. That's not a state machine per se. It's a what I do is a bitmap. It's a bitmap sequence. I just mark a bit. I just mark a one wherever the packet has been received and where it has to be where it's not received. Similarly on the receiver side, and then even the error control algorithm is much simpler. So TCP's error control algorithm, it waits for an ACK back, and to wait for the ACK, it starts a timer. We don't need those timers on the sender side here. also for which packets to retransmit. The NACs say the list of all the packets that has to be retransmitted. So the sender need not maintain any awareness of that, except that it has to maintain that bitmap.
Flow control, you said you're using underlying information. Which is
Right.
max, right?
Max outgoing rate
That's
from the send queue.
max rate. MAC essentially is a link.
MAC is a link, yes.
So for one
For a-
network, it might be an extreme of the actual packet. But let's say example,
Multi-hop. So multi-hop we implement a inter-node protocol. It's a probe-based protocol. A probe is sent out and it collects MAC status information from each intermediate node in the forward path. I'll come to that. So this is that intra-node information. So this is the network stack, and the CLAP protocol requires information that it can use to estimate bandwidth. So that information is the outgoing packet rate from the MAC. The MAC actually sees everything that's happening in its neighborhood. If there are many nodes contending for the channel, it gets lesser channel access time. So if we count the number of packets it sent out in an interval, it reflects that channel time. And also it captures any auto rate adaptation implications. If there is a lower channel rate being used, then there are fewer packets. So the outgoing rate captures that, but just that is not enough. What when the link is not saturated? So I also provisioned this underflow flag. Another thing that I have not mentioned here is the send queue size. To increase the number of packets in the to be sent, CLAP requires to know how many more packets it can send. So that's the other parameter, the queue availability parameter. And the status is extracted by using standard API by the control framework, so that individual processes do not need to know specific parameters in each of those. So this is the internode protocol that I talked about. So a probe packet is sent from source to destination, and at intermediate nodes it picks out the same MAC status information, and that MAC status information will give information of each of the links. The probe itself has the minimum outgoing rate value, so that when the probe comes back to the source knows the bandwidth of the slowest link, and in a single path routing that is sufficient for information for it to adapt. And this is the probe packet format. So it has the parameter values. Bottleneck node is required for each of the parameters, because let's say, okay, in this scenario I'm only picking MAC status parameters. There could be a maybe routing parameter or something else, some new thing. The bottleneck here, I mean, in this case is the slowest bandwidth. In the other case, it may be there could be a queue problem, and there could be another node that has a shorter queue than this one, even though it has a higher sending rate. So if some other protocol is using cross-layer information for that, then you need to know that
This
information.
is the general framework
It's a
for
general-
predicting all kinds of status.
All status, yeah.
Depending on the protocol, you decide.
You can use it. Yes,
So
exactly.
in this case, you happen to use the max setting.
Max sending rate only. Yeah, I only use max sending rate.
so it's the sending rate and not the number of MAC packets acknowledged.
No, it's only the sending rate, because error is independent. So in the one hop, we considered the wireless LAN environment, and so we compare the performance where I showed TCP shuts down. We compare with CLAP. Here I show a earlier CLAP version which uses periodic NACs instead of pivot NACs, that is the non-overlapping NACs. So here we see CLAP completes file transfer in 4.7 seconds, and TCP takes over 19 seconds to complete the transfer. There's a large gain. The gain mostly here is because it separates flow control and error control, and CLAP continues to send packets even when there are losses. So the gain is this. So CLAP achieves 68% of the good put available, and TCP does 2%. The multi-flow scenario this is the performance of clap. There are 5 clap flows, there are 5 TCP flows. We see TCP is quite incompatible in the sense that while one TCP flow is operating, another one has shut down, and so on. This happens again because of that same problem, the combined flow control. Whereas here, clap, all the flows are seen to share the bandwidth. The sharing happens because of the 802.11 MAC. When there are multiple nodes contending, the channel time is shared among them because of CSMA CA. This happens towards the end of the file because of the periodic NACs, where information doesn't arrive fast enough at the sender node. So what happens is that not only fast enough, in each NAC there isn't enough information for it to match the available bandwidth.
What are the channel parameters?
It's the same as the one hop scenario. This, yeah. So it's a 11 Mbps link, and actually no, there is no noise injection over there, and all the losses there are because of interference. It's an NS2 simulation. What else? I can't think of anything else.
In general, you tend to think that TCP is fair. That is, if you have multiple flows, TCP will be fair to all the.
Fair to all the flows.
Why is it that in this case it does not show that?
Because of its own inherent problem that it scales back when it should not be scaling back. It sees, so here the problem is there are collisions, MAC collisions. When there are MAC collisions, TCP thinks that there's a congestion somewhere, so it scales back. Actually, it recovers from some of them. It doesn't recover from some of them because of the too many losses in a burst. And that's why they don't share the here I have disabled the MAC retries.
How long do you have these bursts of losses that you're seeing there?
So it's a multi-fold problem. There could be few losses, but because of fast recovery, TCP fast recovery, it aggravates the self-interference problem and causes a deadlock scenario. We analyze that for a single flow. And we see here, like, let's say the pink curve here. So the pink curve increases here and then shuts down, and then goes up again, shuts down. So we see if we take just that flow and analyze it, it will have the same fast recovery. Fast recovery aggravates the self-interference in this case. So I showed it in a previous slide before you came. I can go back there if you want. Okay. The answer to that is, I use TCP Reno over here. TCP Reno cannot recover from multiple losses in a congestion window. And we showed in an earlier paper that self-interference actually causes multiple losses in a congestion window. Because before the TCP congestion window, I can bring this. You do see, but it doesn't happen too often. This one. Actually, let me go back to the previous one. Here. So, multiple losses in a congestion window happen because congestion window in this case is 15 packets. 3 losses occur before the TCP sender realizes that there was a loss. When it realizes there was a loss, it scales back the congestion window, like here. It scales back the congestion window much later, long after those 3 losses happened, and one more data packet is lost. Only then it scales back. But TCP Reno has been shown not to perform well when there are multiple losses. And the reason why it does not perform well is that it keeps increasing its congestion window as and when new packets come. That causes it to have a very large number of outstanding packets. So at the end of fast recovery, when it resumes the congestion window to normal mode, there are more outstanding packets than the congestion window will permit. So the congestion window just waits till the situation goes away. So that's a deadlock scenario. And we showed that deadlock happens very often in the case of self-interference because of that. There are too many losses in a congestion window. Does this make sense? It does happen. No, actually, no, it does happen. In fact, TCP New Reno has been proposed to overcome this problem. It doesn't overcome it completely. TCP New Reno can handle a certain number of even when there are more than one loss in a congestion window. It can handle them. But it is also susceptible because during fast recovery, it also increases the likelihood of self-interference loss. It doesn't reduce the self-interference loss. So,
You're saying self-interference, what do you mean to say?
This one.
Time varying wireless link?
No, this one.
Self-interference as an example of
no, time varying wireless link is a separate problem. The self-interference problem is that when the 802.11 MAC is operating in saturation, such as here, a packet is sent, data packet is sent, and an ACK packet is sent by another node in the same time slot, the same MAC slot. If it was Poisson traffic, the likelihood.
artificially created a problem by turning off MAC retry.
Right.
What do you want to
Well, this problem will still occur even there is MAC retries. MAC retry will overcome it right there. It takes care of the link loss, right there without having TCP. TCP will not notice the loss. But I'll show in a later case. It would be there. I mean, the problem doesn't go away because let's say there are 3 nodes. TCP problem, I think I have a result in the multi-hop case where TCP will see losses even when there are MAC retries. So, because of interference. So, it doesn't go away. It just reduces the intensity of it. Because MAC retries are always there. And you are usually the only user.
No, we have like 5 or 6 laptops.
But not all of them are active. They are? Actually, you will see the problem. You might.
See a very interesting problem due to one laptop basically responded
Right.
because Mac behavior to misbehave and everybody else will get. I mean, someone with the lowest signal to noise ratio operating and that is being a flight transfer from there.
I think that's the reason, related to the reason I was looking for, which is everybody's going through some cable modem channel
That is much slower.
a couple of megabits per second total, but it's actually less than.
Less, much less. That's right.
You also like multi-hop wireless surveillance and more.
Yeah, but these are not, those are not.
Those were the one hop. Yeah. Those were the one hops. Right. Again, I've disabled. Yeah, I'm not even considering hidden nodes over here. Yeah. Okay, so coming to the multi-hop scenario, mesh networks are an upcoming wireless network use because they are being used for municipal Wi-Fi access and as backhaul in high-performance wireless LAN. So it's an important problem to consider. So what we have done is analyzed transport issues in this scenario. So again, like as I showed in an earlier slide, I consider the performance in a primary flow which has three wireless hops, and then I see what is the effect of when I introduce background flows. Note that like in a wired scenario, people normally see multi-flow cases by having shared nodes. Because of the interference in 802.11, even when nodes are not shared, like here, bandwidth fluctuations occur. There is sharing of the resource of the wireless medium. So I create two scenarios, one where there is interference dominates, where I introduce the background flows so that there is bandwidth fluctuations. And then another one, I introduce more noise. So here also there is noise, but here there is more noise, fluctuating noise. And there is also one background flow, this background flow that comes up. but less frequently. So I'd like to mention that we used the probe packets here were sent 10 packets a second, okay, and each packet was about 40 bytes. So with that, it constituted a load of 3.2 kilobits per second. That is, probes went from 1 to 14 and the probe came back the same path. So that framework was used to collect cross-layer information in the path, in that flow path.
So the noise, the time varying noise, like how big is that in relation?
This one, 0.1, I'm sorry, packet.
Well, it's 0.1 seconds.
This is point, I fluctuated it at the rate of 0.1 second. Rapid.
I agree it's about 100 seconds.
10 per second. 10 per second. 0.1. No, this noise is independent of the rate of sending probe packets.
You know about the transmission time?
Oh, transmission time, yeah. Yeah, I can show you that. So basically, oh, this is not the ideal one. But if we see, it's 1.5 megabits per second is the throughput it gets. I'm seeing the UDP throughput. 1000 byte packets. So it's about 150 packets. No, is it 150? Because it's a multi-hop scenario. Multi-hop, the available band, because of self-interference, the bandwidth available end-to-end is lesser. So basically, in the noise-dominated scenario, this is, first let me go with TCP performance. So this pink curve here is when no MAC retries are not used. So TCP there takes about 25 seconds to complete the file transfer, but it recovers file transfer only after the noise has ended. Noise ends here. So and this causes it to utilize only 2% of the available goodput. When we use MAC retries, this red curve here shows TCP performance. So with MAC retries in the presence of noise, there's a large fluctuation in goodput of TCP. So while the simulation, while the throughput does, while there is gain in goodput, MAC retries do cause these large fluctuations, which when there are multiple flows, there can be queue overflows, transient queue overflows. On the other hand, in CLAP, we didn't use MAC retries, and it was able to adapt to changing bandwidth fluctuation and complete the file transfer even in the presence of noise.
Those two outliers, how can you do better than?
Better than that? Because, yeah, good question. It just shows that there were too many packets received in that interval. It can do it because this is in the multi-hop scenario, right? Here. So let's say there are nothing else happening. Let's say all these nodes are quiet. Let's say, okay, in this case, all these nodes are quiet. They're not sending anything. This one suddenly sees a much higher bandwidth available, much higher channel time available. So in that particular scenario, because I was just comparing for the same TCP flow, this could have stopped sending. These nodes could have stopped sending at some point of time. 100 packets. Yeah, and because TCP anyway operates like that in traffic bus, so.
So which that picture you just showed, where you said the noise started sort of a little bit to the left and then it ended
Here.
Are you talking about one of those little tiny gaps of 0.1 seconds?
No. The whole thing. This one.
Whole
This
burst?
one. This whole burst. It finishes at 9 seconds, and it's after 9. So I cannot track it with TCP performance because it's anyway bursty. But the noise ended here. I should have marked it on this.
And somehow the difference between no noise and the noise
Noise.
is adaptation? Did you?
No, I disabled. There was no auto-rate adaptation.
So
It always was operating at 11 Mbps.
and
Yes.
it caused packets at your whatever your 150 byte packet at 11 to be in error with what probability?
Oh, that's seen here. So let's see. I cannot measure it over this, but I use the same noise in the one hop scenario. So the likelihood of a loss was about 20%. So since I use the same noise in all the nodes, inject the same noise in all the nodes, it's in each node it's 20%. So it's a compounding effect as we go.
So you'd have situations where 100 or so packets in a row would see
Random loss. Random loss.
and then
20% error rate during this time, the small 0.1 second interval.
right, and then another 0.1
Second.
interval where the error rate is simply 0.
Yes, I tried to do that. I mean, it's probably not realistic, but it's a stress test. Okay. And
It's working on the ether says the error rate might be as much as 60%. Like it goes from
here?
like
This one, no.
It says you can see the error rate in UDP.
Yeah, but you could, but here there is bandwidth drop also because there's a background flow that comes up. So both things happen here. It's noise dominated, but there is a background flow also. So in both the multi-hop scenarios I'm considering, there's both noise and bandwidth, time varying, completely time varying. So one thing I would like to add, so why is TCP having these fluctuations? It's twofold. One is with MAC retries, there is exponential backoff at the MAC layer for each packet that it has to send. So when there is a loss, the MAC backs off, it chooses a slot in double the congestion window and tries to send the packet. There's a loss again, it tries to increase the contention window more. It also causes delay variance for TCP. This is a well-known problem. It was published in an earlier paper by people from Bell Labs. Basically, when TCP sees ACKs arriving irregularly, it also sends irregular traffic bursts. So that increases the fluctuation problem. So there's like a complex effect that causes TCP to fluctuate like this. So this also demonstrates that, so CLAP that does not use MAC retries finishes in about 7 seconds, while TCP with MAC retries takes much longer. So this demonstrates that fluctuating SNR and time varying bandwidth is probably better handled at the transport layer than at the link layer, instead of with MAC retries. Magic routing, yes, this is fixed routing here, yeah. Right.
But there's good arguments not to complicate the MAC here. I think the MAC retry that is MAC here. But switching in this network, you don't want to have the way of sending each packet if you get into the problem with transport.
The error correction scheme must be tuned to the type of error, underlying error characteristic. That's what you're doing.
But for single hop wireless, I think using MAC retry is the established technique. It's essentially almost.
So next we consider a case where the scenario is dominated with bandwidth fluctuations. There are few errors. So here, yes, with MAC retries, TCP does not so bad. There aren't so many fluctuations. So that's because MAC retries are designed to handle interference, not to handle channel loss, channel noise. But I captured one scenario. I mean, I had to just do a lot of experimentation and find out the weaknesses of TCP, and then I introduced this noise to create this scenario where it undergoes a timeout. So I captured this scenario where while there is good bandwidth and there is MAC retries, TCP still undergoes a timeout. The problem happens because TCP underwent some losses in this region when there was noise. It comes to know of the loss after some delay. and when it comes to know of the loss, it scales back its sending rate, while there was good bandwidth available. So in essence, TCP is kind of doing a proxy adaptation, and we show here that by using MAC status information, you can do better. And so even this problem can be handled better at the transport layer. So my last but 2 slides. So basically what we did here is we identified that there's some of the fundamental wireless problems that cause poor reliable transfer. And we identified that the wireless link characteristics, general ones, interference and time varying links are the true reasons. We evaluated TCP in great detail and analyzed why it performs badly while self-interference, particularly in self-interference, and showed fundamental limits. So in the past 15 years, there have been so many enhancements of TCP. We show here that there's only so much you can do with it. And then we proposed our new solution where we decoupled flow control and error control, and we used cross-layer information to enhance the transport. So we to provide the cross-layer information, we developed this simple but systematic framework which can extract that information, and it's designed so that it can be used by other layers also, other layers to extract the information and to provide the information. With this approach, CLAP achieves reasonably high performance, and it approaches the upper bound UDP good put. And it reduces file transfer delays. So from what the insights, this is a summary of the insights we gained from here, is there are fundamental limitations in TCP design that requires new transport protocols for wireless networks. We demonstrated the efficacy of using our approach, which is to decouple the flow control and error control and use cross-layer information to accommodate time varying links. And we showed that interference and fluctuating SNR are better handled at the transport layer than at link layer. And although we have addressed CLAP in the wireless scenarios we considered here, which is 802.11 one-hop and multi-hop links, in general, CLAP can be applicable even in cellular environments or to wired environments, as long as there is an overlay network that is there that can provide it the bandwidth information. So for future work, we have implemented CLAP mostly in the NS2 simulator, and it needs to be implemented in real systems to evaluate code complexity, because provisioning cross-layer parameters is non-trivial, and we need to do it very carefully because it has to be done at the kernel level. It's possible to extend, so far CLAP does cross-layer information to adapt the sending rate for flow control, but it could possibly done even for error control, with maybe use some hybrid ARQ techniques to improve performance. CLF can be extended to benefit other layers also, and here we have studied, we also need to study the interaction of CLAP protocol with other routing protocols, say AODV or DSR, or maybe incorporate the CLF feedback in AODV maintenance messages. And then, so while we have presented CLAP here for reliable transport, if we remove the error control aspect from CLAP, just the flow control can be used to satisfy requirements for video applications, say. So that's it.